Alright, let's move into phase 3 of our platform game, and we need to load in a whole bunch of sprites for this part. So we'll just start right there, click on the new sprite and click load sprite. We will start with dead. Is that right? Yeah. And we want to uncheck remove background. It's called dead here. We're going to name it sprite death, but it's a red block, and all it is used for is to sit there and create a collision event. When the player touches this, they die. And so we'll use this to simulate, holes in the ground or objects that can't be touched, and it'll be invisible. It'll be kind of behind the tile set. So we'll open that up. We'll name it SPR_death and click OK. Next, we want to grab the monster sprites. We need both left and right, so we'll start with left, and this time we do want to remove background. So monster L, and we'll call this SPR_monster L. And we want to uncheck precise collision checking and check the separate collision masks. Choose the modify mask and change it to manual. And just like we did with our player character, we need to set the same bounding box numbers for both of the left and right sprites for this monster. So for left, we're going to use 3. For right, we're going to use 28. For top, we'll use 1. And for bottom, we'll use 31. And if you look closely, you can see that his tail sticks out a little bit and his nose sticks out a little bit. And that's okay. It's more of a problem often to have a big bounding box, because then it seems like the player's triggering the collision when they're not even touching him. So it's okay to have some of the sprite uncovered. We'll leave it at rectangle and click OK. Alright, next one we'll grab is his counterpart. So we'll choose load sprite, monster R, remove background, open, and we'll name it SPR_monster R. And same process, uncheck precise collision checking, check the separate collision masks. And I think I've said this before, but when you only have one sprite at a time, like this guy isn't animated, he isn't a series of sprites, I don't think this matters, but the tutorial has it checked, so we'll go with that. Modify the mask, and we're going to use the same exact numbers, so click manual. For left, we'll go 3. For right, we'll go 28. For top, we'll go 1, and for bottom, 31. Click OK, and we'll move on. Alright, the next sprite is monster flat. And this is the squished version of the monster we just created. Okay, and he doesn't need any special settings, so we'll just click OK. Oh, well, let's rename him first. SPR_monster flat. Click OK. Another sprite. We're going to grab one called marker, and make sure you uncheck remove background. This is a little blue square block, and what this was used for is to set a boundary for the monsters. So the monsters, if you want to have a boundary on where they can walk back and forth, they won't go past the marker. So you just put that in your map, and they can walk between a couple of markers. They won't go past it, but the player never sees this. So click open, and that one's fine as is, so OK. Another sprite. This time we're going to get the flying monster, and we'll start with flying left. Make sure you remove the background, and we'll rename this SPR_flying L. Just like the last monster, uncheck precise collision checking, check separate collision masks, go to modify the mask, manual, and the numbers we'll use on this guy: 4 for the left, 28 for the right, 8 for the top, and 24 for the bottom. And there's a smaller rectangle here. We're leaving part of his head and beak and a little bit of his wing out there, and that's okay. This guy's going to be moving across the area, And you never want to touch this guy or you die, so I think that's why we give a little more space at the top in case you jump over him or past him. It's not necessarily going to trigger it if you're close. Click OK, and then we'll grab the right version. Flying R, separate masks, and manual, same numbers as before, 4 for the left, 28 for the right, 8 for the top, and 24 for the bottom. Click OK. Rename this SPR underscore flying R. I just noticed I didn't name my my marker. So I'm going to go back in and SPR underscore marker. Okay. And we need 2 more sprites. We'll be done loading sprites after that. So we're going to grab the mushroom sprite. And this is an interesting sprite. You see it's just going crazy over here. So we'll go ahead and open it up. Name it SPR underscore mushroom. And it's got 10 different sub-images of different mushrooms. So different colors, different patterns. And the way it's going to work is when the game starts, if there's a mushroom in the room, that mushroom will pick a random image for itself from this list. So every mushroom will look different. You can have a bunch of different mushrooms. Okay, no changes on this one. We'll click OK. And the last sprite we need is a finish sign for leaving the level. And you'll find it right there. It's called level. Open it up. And we'll say SPR underscore level. And that one doesn't need any changes as well. Okay, good. Got a bunch of sprites. Let's now add some sounds. There's 4 that we're going to load. And they're right here in your resources folder. Kill character, kill monster, level, and mushroom. So we'll just pull them out and name them SND kill character. Was that the one we just grabbed? I think so. Yeah, we'll grab the next one, kill monster. Grab the third one, which is level. SND level. And the final sound is mushroom. And you know, you won't be surprised by these sounds. They're reused from some of the previous ones. So if it sounds like the clown bounce or the clown click, you know, that's where it comes from. All right, click OK. So there's our 4 sounds. Okay, next we need to create objects for some of these sprites here. So the first one that we'll do is the monster object. So let's create a new object and we'll name it obj underscore monster. And we're going to start this monster moving to the right. So we'll use sprite monster right. And when this monster is created, so let's add a create event, we want it to move to the right at a speed of 4. If it collides with a block object, then we want it to reverse its horizontal speed. So it's just going to turn around and go back the other way. Or horizontal direction, not speed. And the other collision we need is for a marker, but we haven't created that object yet, so we'll come back to that in a second. We also want to make sure that its sprite gets changed every time it turns around. Otherwise, it's going to look like it's walking backwards. So let's go to add event, and we're going to add an end step. In other words, at the end of each step, the very last thing in the step, is we'll check the monster's direction and we'll change the sprite to the appropriate sprite to match that. So end step, and we're going to check the horizontal speed. So we go over here to control and we check variable or test variable. We're looking for h speed, and if h speed is larger than 0, okay, h speed is measured on the x axis. So if you're moving to the right, that's increasing, so you're going up positive numbers. So if h speed is positive, he's moving to the right. Click OK. We'll grab out a couple of blocks here. If that's the case, we want to change the sprite to monster right. And we can leave these the same, subimage 0 and speed of 1. If monster right was a animated GIF with multiple frames, then we wouldn't want the speed to be 1 unless it was like, you know, the speed 1 would mean it would run through all those animations. Our monster right sprite doesn't have any sub-images, so it's fine. Okay, and then we'll put an else in here, back under control, grab else, a couple more blocks. And if this isn't the case, we want to set the sprite to monster left. Okay, so that'll take care of that. Let's click OK for now. Let's create the marker object. So obj marker, and it has the blue sprite, and it's not visible, and it is just going to sit there and do nothing. So we'll leave that alone. Okay, let's go back into our monster object, and we'll add a collision event with a marker, and it's the same as with a block. We'll just have him reverse horizontal direction. Okay, let's create our second monster, which is our flying monster. And so we'll click the object button, and this is obj underscore flying, and we'll start it with flying right. By the way, the reason we always start flying right is because the objects, when they, you know, start in GameMaker, by default, their direction setting is at 0. And if you remember from their Asteroids game, 0 on the direction, on the 360 direction circle, is facing to the right. So the direction is 0, it should be to the right. So let's use the sprite that looks like the object is pointing to the right, because that's what it thinks it's doing. When this object is created, so add a create event, we're going to start him moving to the right with a speed of 3. Click OK. We'll do an end step event to control which sprite is displayed for which way he's moving. So check the h speed, test variable h speed, horizontal speed, and if that is larger than 0, grab a couple of blocks. We will change the sprite to monster flying to sprite flying right, and those are fine. Go back to control and grab an else and a couple of blocks. And so the else means that if h speed is less than 0 or smaller than 0, that means he must be moving to the left. And so we'll change the sprite to match that. Sprite moving, flying left. Click OK. Alright, and then finally we want to have the same two collision events here. Collision with a block, we will reverse the horizontal direction, and collision with a marker, same thing. Okay, the next object we're going to set up is the dead monster. So the flying monsters you can't touch. If you try to touch them in any way, you'll get killed. But the monsters that walk on the ground, object monster, you can jump on them, and when you jump on them and you land on them from the top, they end up getting squished. And so we're going to have a squished version of the monster that'll sit there for about half a second or whatever, a third of a second, and then disappear. Okay, so here's how we'll do that. Create a new object, and we'll name this obj underscore monster flat, and we'll choose the sprite monster flat. And when this object is created, we're going to set an alarm, and so we'll just use alarm 0. Oops, sorry. And we're going to set that to 10. So 10 steps is, there's 30 steps in a second, so that's a third of a second. And we'll click OK. So then we need to add an alarm event. So what happens when alarm 0 does go off? Well, in this case, we want to destroy the instance, and that's all. Pretty simple object. All right, let's go ahead and set up the mushroom. Object mushroom, and we'll choose the mushroom sprite. Now, if that's all we did when we placed a mushroom, it would sit there in the room and it would cycle through all those different patterns that you saw. And, maybe you want to have a special mushroom that's worth more points, and that's how you could do that. You could have it look like a rainbow mushroom that's all changing colors and magical or whatever. But for plain mushrooms, we want to do it this way. In the create event, we are going to set the sprite. So go to main one, set the sprite, and we're going to set it to its own sprite, the sprite mushroom. But for the sub image, instead of picking one of the numbers 0 through 9 or whatever, we're going to have a randomly selected number, and we'll do that by typing in random, and then in the parentheses we'll type in the number of chances. How many chances are there? Well, the mushroom happens to have 10 sub images, 10 choices. So if we say random and then we put 10 in the parentheses, that means it's going to come up with 10 random possibilities. And then we want to make sure we set the speed to 0. Once it chooses one of those sub images, one of those mushroom patterns or colors, we don't want it to change. We want it to stay on that frame. So we'll set the speed to 0 and click OK. All right. Now every time, if you placed 5 mushrooms on the ground in your level, every time you started the game, those mushrooms would look different. That's how that's going to work. One other thing on the mushroom, we need to set its depth to 10, and later on that'll come across as, if we don't do that, I think sometimes it gets drawn in front of our score panel that we're going to draw. So set the depth to 10. Let's go to the create an object for the level. So obj underscore level, and grab the level sign sprite. And again, set the depth to 10, but this thing doesn't need to do anything, so we'll just let it sit there. And I think that's all we need to do for the new objects. Okay, the big changes come for the character. And you'll notice in this game, this is an important principle, that all the most important things are being handled on the character. In some of the games you guys have done on your own, sometimes I've seen students handle collisions, sometimes on one object, sometimes on another object. That's fine if you can keep track of all that, but it's much better to keep as much of your collisions and as much of your programming stuff as possible on one object. So if you'll notice as we work through this, the character object is going to have a lot of events, and those events are going to have a lot of actions. And you'll end up with a lot of dumb objects like the level object or the marker object or the block object They don't do anything. They just sit there, and that's fine. We handle all their collisions on the character. Okay, the first thing we need to add to the character is a collision for the monster. So add event, collision, object monster. Okay, this is tricky. What we want to do is we need to test whether or not, when the collision happens, we need to test whether the player is, first of all, above the monster, okay, and second of all, moving down. So if the player is above the monster and moving down, that means you're allowed to squish the monster. If those aren't true, if both of those aren't true, that means you're going to be the one that dies. So either if you're moving up, or if you're not above the monster, if you're even with or below the monster, then you're going to be the one that dies. So how do we test that? How do we test two things at once? Well, let's get into that. To test two things at once, what we have to do is test what's called an expression. And that is kind of it can be a combination of mathematical calculations that result in a number. And you'll test that number, or a combination of true-false things. So if you go to the Control tab and then select Test Expression, which is the question mark with the octagon around it, we can type in an expression to test. So here's an example. And this is one of those things that you'll see in programming languages if you guys stick with this and take some programming courses, either from me or from college or something like that. We're going to look at two statements, and it's kind of like testing if something is true or false. We're going to do two tests at the same time. So here's what we'll say. The expression is v speed is greater than 0, and, okay, I typed in Shift-7, got the and symbol. It's called the ampersand, and what that's used to do is test two conditions. It uses two ands because in programming languages a single and usually has a different meaning, and you can't use it for that. So two ands together means an and test. In other words, testing if both cases are true. So vertical speed's greater than 0, and y is less than other dot y plus 8. Okay, now that probably looks like a foreign language to you guys. It's kind of mumbo jumbo. Let me walk you through what this means. The first part I think is pretty clear. We're checking if the vertical speed is greater than 0. It's true or false, okay? And we're checking another condition. We want to check if y is greater than or less than the other's y plus 8. So what's y? Y is object characters y position, their up-down position on the screen. Okay? What's other dot y? Well, other dot y is the monster's y value, up and down position on the screen. So we're going to look at where the player is and where the monster is vertically. And when they say y plus 8, we're saying we're modifying the player's y, the other's y value. Okay, so the other tricky thing about y is that y gets bigger the farther you go down the page. So this is a little confusing, but if the player's y value is less than the other's y value, that means the player's higher on the screen, because y is 0 at the top of the screen and it's much bigger at the bottom. So if the player's y value is less, that means the player is closer to the top of the screen than the other object, which is the monster. Now the reason we're saying plus 8 is we're going to take the object monster's y value and add 8 to it, which means we're going to be 8 pixels below the top of the monster. So we're giving the player a little bit of grace here, a little bit of extra movement possibility. So you don't have to be totally above the monster. You just have to be above at least 8 pixels down on the monster's head. So above the monster's forehead, in essence, is what we're saying. Okay? So to summarize, make sure that your vertical speed is greater than 0. In other words, you are moving down the screen. You're coming down. You're landing. And you're above the monster's forehead. Does that make sense? That's kind of where we're going with this. If that's true, okay, if that's true, then you successfully have squished the monster. So we're going to put in a comment to remind ourselves what just happened if that's true. Okay, let's go ahead and play a sound. We'll play the kill monster sound. Loop is false. Next, we'll set the score to 50 relative. And also, we need to tell the monster object to stop moving. Okay. Otherwise, when we change him into the squished monster, if we don't stop him from moving, then the squished monster will slide along the floor as if it was still moving, which looks really creepy and weird. We don't want that. So for directions, we're going to click the stop button. Speed is 0. And so we squish the monster. The first thing, before we squish him, we'll just stop him from moving. Whoops, and let's make sure this is not self. It should be other. And then we're also going to change the sprite. I'm sorry. We're going to change the instance, which is this blue into red circle here. Change instance for other. And we're going to change it into monster flat. And perform events, yes. And the events we're going to perform, what that means is we're going to look at the flat monsters events, which are set a timer, and after the timer goes off, disappear or destroy your instance. Okay, so if we don't say no, that thing will sit there forever. So we want to say yes. Okay, else, okay, remember this is all on the condition that we are above the monster and we're coming down on the monster. So if that's not true, then we tried to land on the monster or we touched the monster in a way that wasn't okay. And we're dead now. So we need to kill the character in this else. So let's go to control, grab an else, drag out some blocks, and we are going to put a comment that says destroy character. So the first thing we'll do after the comment is play a sound. This time we'll play the kill character sound. Next we will grab the sleep action and we will sleep for 1000 milliseconds. Redraw is true. And then for now we're going to restart the room. Which is in main 1. And it's this little up arrow with the room there. Just restart the room. Let's do the fade in, fade out, fade out, fade in. And that's how we'll restart the room. Okay, so that handles the monster. Next, we need to add an event for a collision with the flying object. Okay, the flying monster. And with this one, it's easy because if you ever touch this one, the character dies. So all we have to do is we'll play our sound. Whoops, that was right there. Play the sound, kill character. We will sleep for 1000 milliseconds. Redraw is true. And then restart the room. Fade out and in. Okay. A couple more things to add here. If the player touches a mushroom, collision mushroom, we'll play a sound, and we have a mushroom sound for that. We will set the score to 10 relative, so 10 points per mushroom. And then also we're going to destroy other, which is the mushroom. Okay. Next, we're going to do the add event for the level. And we'll play a sound which says sound level. We will sleep for 1,000 milliseconds. And then we need to check if there is another room to go to. So this one with the arrow pointing to the right is check next. If next room exists, bring out a couple of blocks. Then we'll go to the next room and transition. You know, you can pick whatever you want to. I'll choose blend. Okay, else. Let's go to control, grab else, grab a couple of blocks. If there's no other room to go to, so if we just have one level like we do in this case, then we want to show the high score table. And you know, they have actually, for the background, they say we'll use the sky background. That's fine. And restart the game, which is right here. Okay, finally, if we have a collision, or I guess we have two more things to add here. If we have a collision with object death, okay, add event, collision. Oops, we never created death. Not good. Okay, let's click OK on that for now. Go to object, obj underscore death, and for sprite we'll do sprite death. This object is not visible. That's it. Just leave it. Okay, let's go back to our character. If we have a collision with death, which I hope none of you do until you're very old, a collision with death, we're going to play sound, kill character, we're going to sleep to pause the game for just a second, and we will restart the room. And you can choose an effect if you want to, or no effect. And that's it for death. Finally, we have to have an other event. If the player ever gets outside the room, we want to make sure that that the player is destroyed and they lose a life. So if you're outside the room, we're going to check the variable y. So check variable, a test variable. We're going to test y. And we're going to see if it's larger than room height. ROOM underscore HEIGHT. Side note, there is no such word as height. A lot of people say height. What's your height? It's not a word. It's height. So don't have an H on the end. Room height and larger than. Okay. If the player's Y value is greater than the room height, that means they're out of the room and they're below the room. So they've gone, you know, down below the room. So we need to kill them at that point. Okay. So let's drag out a couple of blocks. We're going to play the sound, kill character. We're going to sleep for 1,000 milliseconds, and then restart the current room. And you can choose a transition. Okay, so we've done a bunch of work. Next, you need to go into your room and add some of this stuff in there. So, for example, one thing we can do is where these blocks are, we can delete a couple blocks. I don't have my mouse out. I'm using the trackpad, and it makes me choose delete on all these, which is really kind of frustrating. Okay, go to my tiles, delete these guys. And let's put some spikes in here. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll go to objects and we'll choose death. And we'll put these spikes right on top of the spikes there. And what that'll do is if the player falls in this pit, they'll touch the red spots, which will kill the character. It'll look like the spikes are killing him, but really it's object death, which the player can't see. Okay, we can add a monster. And we'll put a monster right here. And we can add a flying monster right here. And then if you want to put some boundaries on your monsters, you can put a marker out there. And the player won't see it, but the monster will. And the monster will hit that marker and turn around and fly back. And monsters will bounce off of or turn around when they hit blocks or markers. So if I want to, I can put a marker here and here, and this bird will fly back and forth between those two spots. I can put a mushroom right up here, maybe 2 of them, maybe 3. And those will all come up with different looks randomly. And we can put a level object maybe over here for the player to jump to. I think that's all that we added, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll test this out. We'll see if this all works. Okay, moving around, we can see that I think we forgot to set up the bird colliding with a marker. Yeah, the bird's ignoring the marker. So note that the mushrooms each have a different look. We got a mushroom sound. I'm going to jump on this monster here. Okay, he got squished and then he did that. I'm going to run over here and fall on the spikes. Yeah, there you go. Touch the monster, touch the bird monster. Different mushrooms this time. Okay, and then the level. Okay, and winner. Okay, let's go fix the bird thing real quick. I think I needed the markers to be here. By the way, once you start using these smaller sprites here, if you change your grid to 8 by 8, whoops. So with your grid at 8 by 8, these fit perfectly in each square, so it gives you a little bit more freedom to place these down. You can also hold down Control when you drop one of these, and that lets you drag it, even if the grid is bigger. So if the grid's at 16, if I try to put a marker down, it just snaps to the corner. But if I hold down Control, I'm sorry, not Control, Option, I can drag it and it won't snap to the grid. Okay, so there's options there. But I prefer to go with the 8 by 8 grid when I'm using the small markers there. You can leave these on there if you want, or you can delete them, doesn't matter, it won't affect the game. Let me just double check that the bird works now. And the bird is now traveling between those two invisible markers, okay? So everything looks good. That's it for phase 3.